Welcome. This is Barrel to Batteries Decoding Energy's Next Chapter, an Enerdatics podcast. I'm your host, Mohit Kaul. For those of you who may be new here, Enerdatics is world's leading energy market intelligence platform, combining deep data, sharp analytics with consulting and advisory support for companies across the energy value chain. In season one, I sit down with startup founders who are reshaping the energy system from hydrocarbon to electrons, from legacy scale to innovation. Each episode, we explore their journey, the pivotal decisions they have made, and their vision for what's next. Let's get started. Today, I'm joined by someone who sits at the crossroads of deep technical know how, finance, and the clean energy shift. Shawn Shaw is the founder of Camelot Energy, a firm that's building smart solutions in renewables and energy storage and working to push the industry forward at scale. Before founding Camelot, Shawn spent decades working across renewables and storage in advisory, project finance, and development roles. What I've always respected about his story is how he's seen the industry evolve from early days, navigated its cycles, and now channels that experience into building something that is lean, smart, and future focused. He's pragmatic, experienced, and laser focused on creating real value in a space where stakes are high and a new challenge hits your screen daily. Shawn, I'm really glad you could join us today. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me. And that was an awfully wonderful introduction. I hope the next little bit where I'm actually talking doesn't disappoint compared to that. It was lovely.
Absolutely. I'm sure that, this is going to be very interesting next 30, 40 minutes that we spend here. I intend to start with your journey and maybe hit on, some early experiences, move into what we see today, and then end with what you and I believe is going to be the future, right? So let's dive in. Let's dive in. My first question to you. You've been in the energy sector for over 2 decades. What's changed the most that you believe, from the early days of what I call as early barrel days and the new battery era? So what do you believe in the energy sector has changed from the early barrel days and the new battery era?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I always appreciate a chance to kind of consider where we have come to versus where we started. I won't go back all the way to the 70s because I wasn't born yet. I wasn't that old. But I will say that when I first got into solar and batteries was a 10 kilowatt system was large. The systems cost $10 to $15 per watt for your average sort of solar project. And the only way these systems could get built was with really substantial direct public subsidy. We people now talk about the sort of subsidies built into the IRA, but that's really it. We've come so far in terms of the structure of those subsidies. And back when I started in the early 2000s, the incentives were straight. NYSERDA, for example, would give $5 per watt to a residential customer to install solar. And at that time, the folks that were doing those projects and involved in that industry were kind of the diehards. They were the folks that were in it for the planet. Home Power Magazine was publishing a whole column called Guerrilla Solar about people who were interconnecting solar to the electrical grid without any permits or approvals. They would literally get photographed next to their project with bandanas covering their faces and such. And it was very, tongue in cheek, but also a thing that was really happening. So fast forward to today, and we have far more solar projects interconnected to the grid than I ever thought we would here in the US, to say nothing of the global progress. And I would also say, to the extent that our interconnection system stinks and is fundamentally broken, we have kind of gotten away from just a few folks sneaking solar onto the grid. It used to be solar was this thing that, you'd get onto the grid if you could. It would provide some benefit maybe to somebody, but it was not serious. Nobody was talking seriously when I started this about solar on the grid. The notion of solar being 10 or 15% of any feeder and having the opportunity to cause impact to the broader grid in terms of things like voltage flicker and whatnot. Um, was unheard of. Like we weren't even thinking about it. We were happy to get 5 kilowatts on somebody's roof, but now, renewables are 10% plus of the U.S. electricity mix, making huge strides overseas, particularly in China and Europe. We're serious. Like we have to go. We've changed. Had to change from a mindset of 20 hippies getting together in a Holiday Inn to 40,000 of us clobbering Las Vegas every year for the RE Plus or SPI conference. We've grown up as an industry, and occasionally we don't act like it, but we are serious infrastructure now, and a lot of that is changed from when I got started in it.
That's a great point. And when I was taking notes, I thought, no one was talking seriously. I think I kind of got stuck at that line, and that's where I lead to my next question. So when when you started Camelot, and was it frustration? Was it opportunity? Was it bit of a both? Was it more one than other? What was it that pushed you to start in the space?
Yeah, I've had the privilege of working for a lot of different, a lot of different clients and a number of different consulting firms that cover a wide range of sort of the approach to consulting. And I learned from each of them. And what I would say is that for me, the answer to your question is both. On the one hand, I was frustrated by the limitations I faced working even for the best of other firms that I worked at. I always had my own idea about what I wanted to be doing. So invariably, I would find that I pushed the boundaries and butted heads with the CEOs of those companies in one way or another. And so I said, well, I could keep trying to do this, or I could put up or shut up and start my own company if I think I know the way it should be done. Let's see it. So there was definitely frustration and opportunity both. Now, in terms of the actual market, one of the things that's really been a focus for us is to get out of the landscape of consulting as a necessary evil. Oh, I need to hire a consultant to diligence my project or my boss will get mad at me or I can't finance it. I guess I've got to put up with somebody. Let me see who I can call. That's the type of approach. I really wanted our clients, especially in a world where everything is being automated and customer service all around us is faltering. I really modeled Camelot on the notion of bespoke services. I want all of our clients to feel like they're getting the so-called, a so-called white glove service. And I thought of it, kind of in a parallel to buying a custom tailored suit, right? You can buy a suit off the rack and that'll get the job done. But when somebody actually tailors the suit to you and pays attention to the way you move and the way you sit and stand and all of those kinds of things, I believe it's a whole different experience, and I want our clients to feel that way. I'd love to tell you, Mohit, that I had some brilliant technological innovation, or I'm sitting on a mountain of brilliant IP. But that's it. I mean, really, my brilliant plan is to treat our clients and employees like humans, lead with empathy, and just really live our values every day. And that seems to resonate with people. So that's what I wanted to do. I didn't want to follow the pathway of any of my previous firms, though all of them I learned so much from, and I'm grateful to. But really, I'm trying to strike our own way here, and so far, I think it's working.
Absolutely. I think whatever interactions I've had with your team, I guess those values are shared by everyone. Something that you said very beautifully, treat everyone like humans. Is it that simple? And on most days it is, right? And it definitely makes a difference if you could just do that every day. Another interesting point, Sean, what you said about disagreeing with CEOs. I think I see the good and the bad out of it. But so how do you do this today, right? Now you've worked across all of those different companies, those roles, and today you are the CEO, right? So all of those learnings that you talked about, how do they shape you today? How do you make decisions based on them? How do you lead being the CEO today? Like, what are those learnings and how have they shaped today you as a CEO?
Yeah. Boy, I think that's a great question. So I have taken something different from each of the places I've worked, and I'm still friends with many of the folks I've worked with over the past. They're wonderful humans, and I've been blessed with, you know, being in the renewables industry. I suppose, there's a slant toward, they've all been folks working toward a goal they sort of felt in their hearts. But in terms of how it's shaped my leadership style, I think I've drawn from both, things to do and things not to do in a certain way. And the big one for me was I wanted to have a consulting firm that dispelled some of the tropes, right? The notion of heavily caffeinated consultants that stayed up all night writing the white paper, or consultants that only wrote reports and had no idea how the real world works. And so what I wanted to do is I wanted to do a couple of things. One was to prove that if I brought in experts and I treated them with dignity and respect, and empowered them and got out of their way, that we would be successful. So I go, as in every way I can, I go above and beyond for the team, and I think that they reciprocate that. They go above and beyond for Camelot. And so for me, treating our employees and our team like the professionals and adults that they are has is not a perk. It is the business model. So I don't have the data yet to prove it, but my hypothesis is that this approach means we'll have lower turnover, better performance, fewer wasted hours, lower frustration. We still have hard days. Like, our projects aren't easy. If they were, anybody would do them. Um, but what I can control is the internal culture and the expectations I set for the team and what I can do to support them. And I think that flows through. If you're a consultant and your boss is squeezing you and making you fill out endless piles of useless paperwork and cooking up silly metrics that aren't meaningful just to give you a hard time, there's no way that some of that doesn't flow out into your work. Everyone's human at a certain point. So my hope is to take that advantage of that sort of physical reality and have our folks be treated well internally, so that they in turn also have the time and energy and mental bandwidth to be attentive to our clients. So yeah, no, I've learned a lot over time, and I've worked on small teams, large teams, all of them there had their benefit. I think one of the things that I really took away, I have if you ever have a chance to work for a friend, I know it's it's kind of a mixed bag. Some people say, "Oh, don't mix business and pleasure and whatnot." But I was lucky enough to get to work for a friend who I've had for a long time, and he really taught me. He modeled empathy in his leadership style in a very real way. It wasn't just lip service. It wasn't just a pat on the head. He really, really thought about it, and I thought that was definitely one of the things that is in the column of things I'm trying to emulate, as opposed to things I'm trying to avoid. So that really stuck with me, though.
Thank you for that, Sean. And I think there could be a whole podcast on just this, right? How do you just treat people well and keep moving businesses forward, right? You could be capitalist and still human. So I do have a few questions on culture, but right now, while we're talking about people, I would just like to dig deeper into the company, into the organization, but from more of a technical and role perspective, right? So, so how I understand it, and I think this will benefit our listeners as well. Your team sits at crossroads of project finance, development, and technology. And of course, feel free to kind of describe this for our listeners. So while you sit at those crossroads, how do you see that evolving in the next few years, right? It's a very interesting dynamic between finance, technology, and overall developing and taking projects forward. How do you see that evolving in the next few years, at your organization?
Sure. Yeah. One of the things that I think I'm working on personally now is defining what is the Camelot way of doing things. That's been kind of my watch phrase for my 2026 planning, and obviously this year as well. And part of that is what I call consulting plus. The world is changing. So speaking domestically here in the US, the expiration or effectively the ending of the investment tax credit also takes with it a whole layer of consulting services that independent engineering firms, sort of like ours, would provide. It takes away it takes away that approach where you can work on a project and write a report and offer an informed opinion, but it opens an opportunity, I think, for folks who have that expertise and are willing to get in the game a little bit more. So we are actively stretching the boundaries. I almost never write reports for clients unless they really, really need one, because I'd much rather solve problems than write reports about them. So we roll up our sleeves and dig in. We're commissioning over 1.5 gigawatt hours of battery projects right now. Not writing reports about it. We are doing it. Um, so we're actually working on some really large projects, working on some smaller utility scale projects. We're implementing EMS systems. We're out in the field. We have an incredible focus on our team in terms of construction quality and safety. So we have folks helping to revise codes and standards. We have folks who have their deep installation hands-on experience and are licensed electricians. And they're giving feedback to bankers about projects, because I firmly believe that we are at the crossroads you mentioned, where we have a unique technical capability, but that's not very useful if you can't translate it into real projects and real feedback for folks. So that's where we sit, I think, in many ways. And over the coming years, I think we're going to be, if anything, maybe even more plus than consulting in some ways. We're breaking into direct asset management. We're breaking into all kinds of new areas, because sitting around writing reports and expecting the work to flow in is not a strategy. That's a fallback. So yeah, no, we're getting out there. We're going after the problems that we hear clients actually have. I know I don't like to say to them, sorry, we can't help you with that. I mean, there are some things we can't do, obviously, but approaching it from a yes and here's how standpoint really leads to some powerful conversations. And at absolute worst, it makes the client feel heard, as opposed to, sorry, not in our scope, which just shuts down conversation and sharing.
Great points, Sean. And I was thinking of a couple of things. Feedback from electricians to bankers, I think that was really powerful, right? If we can establish that valuable feedback loop, and I think there's a lot that can come out of it eventually. You spoke about battery projects and how you've been doing small to utility scale on that. You would agree with me, I believe, that storage has gone from being niche to essential today, right? What do you believe is still misunderstood about it from a developer or investor's perspective, right? What's missing in that feedback loop, perhaps? If you could talk about that.
Yeah, no, I think there's a lot that is missing. It's hard to pick any one thing. I will say, developers are always going to be a little bit optimistic in how they model things. So considering the total cost of ownership for a storage project and really coming to grips with things like degradation and augmentation costs, I think are a big missing link still. We still see financial models that assume small quantity augmentations in year 7 or whatnot, just like we saw a few years ago. But the market is fundamentally different. When you're basing all of your assumptions on a fundamental decline in equipment costs, augmentation makes sense. In today's market, where we are near the bottom in terms of DC block pricing for batteries as it is, assuming it's going to cut in half again over the next 7 years so that you can have a cheap augmentation, is problematically optimistic. I also spend a lot of time on fire safety issues, and
Interesting.
I think the through line for all of this is that batteries are not commodities. One battery is fundamentally different from another, and there are reasons they're different and they are important. But it's not to oversimplify batteries. Just because they look like a big steel box on a concrete pad, there is a lot of complexity that goes into it. take, battery commissioning is a perfect example, right? You would think, hypothetically, that you can, it's very easy to tie a bunch of batteries together and operate them on the grid. It's not. There's a months long process that needs to happen. And sometimes we get brought in very late. Commissioning may already be underway. And they're like, this is worse than we thought. Can you help? So don't, I guess my feedback, if there are any developers listening that are wondering what they could do better from my perspective, it would just be to get folks involved earlier, bring in the technical expertise you need earlier, because there's a right time to do things and there's a less good time to do things. And usually you can save a lot of money, time, and trouble if you start some of these processes earlier. Supply agreements are a great example. A lot of times we're brought in and somebody will say, "Yep, we bought these batteries. They're on the boat on their way over, or they're already here. We'd like to do X, Y, and Z with them. And here's our supply agreement." And I look at it and I say, "Well, that's unfortunate because your supply agreement doesn't allow you to do what you think you want to do." And it's a shame because you look at these things and you're like, "I totally could have fixed that if you'd called me a couple months ago." So, that's a big part of it.
I want to go deeper into this, Sean. So you talked about a few things here of, people maybe treating battery as a commodity, or the supply agreement example that you took. And of course, there are other issues that we spoke about. So if you could simplify one thing about how the industry operates or how these deals get done, what would that be? That if you had to pick one thing, what would that be? And why do you think it has still not yet been done? Right? What needs to be done to get it done?
Yeah. I thought about about this one a bit, and I really, there are a lot of industry-wide things that could be fixed. I could say, let's fix interconnection, let's fix permitting.
Of
That's all
course.
very true. But I wanted to kind of follow on to what I was just saying, because there is one that I would say is one I find kind of personally disappointing a lot of the time, is that we get brought in late to a processes. We often go to our clients and almost ask them to run something by us at the screening stage, because what happens in practice is firms like ours typically get brought in late in the deal. You've already spent weeks or months on the deal. You're either late stage or your exclusivity, and now you need technical due diligence done. Well, unfortunately, that diligence does not always turn up good news. And what I find is it's very difficult, because there are deals I would really advise and have advised clients to walk away from, but they're so invested, right? They've sold it to their
And they're so
investment.
late, right? I'm sorry, sorry. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's
So yeah, yeah.
and so you're sort of like, it's sort of like nobody wants to hear they have an unpleasant looking baby, right? Um, and there's no appetite for walking away from a bad deal, and so folks are just pressing on, making the best they can out of these bad deals. And it's no shock at all when later on you see that systems might be underperforming, or we're not getting the revenues that people expected in ERCOT. Like, it's pretty bloody obvious when you consider there are a lot of bad projects getting built because people aren't getting the right advice at the right time. So I understand the need to keep consultants at arm's length, right? Like, but that also goes back to my mission to have some skin in the game and be a partner to our clients, right? Because if that's the case, then there should be much lower of a barrier to seeking the advice you need when you need it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I've had some experience of dealing with projects that are too far or the client is too invested in.
Hmm.
These are tough calls to take, right? Like you said, nobody wants to hear that they have an ugly baby. If I can go further from there, the 2025, as you and I were talking before we started recording, has been a very interesting year.
One word for it.
And I'm sure in the 2 decades, you have seen industry through a few cycles and, slowdowns and whatnot. And I believe that you have to see an industry go through a few slowdowns to believe that you know about that industry or how to operate in that industry. In that sense of good phases and bad phases and slowdowns and coming back on track and things like that, what would you define as real progress, right? What does real progress in the industry look like to you? What is real progress to you?
Yeah. No, it's a great question, and I have seen a lot of ups and downs. We call it the solar coaster for a reason, right? Um, for me though, my focus, I said I wasn't going to talk about the 70s, but I'm going to talk about it a little bit because when I was coming into this industry, I was shocked I think it was in high school I figured this out. But to realize that we almost had a clean energy economy starting in the 70s. What happened though was that, I mean, a lot of things happened, but fundamentally, the public lost trust in the technologies, right? The newspaper reporting at the time and shortly after was rife with, boondoggle government investments and companies failing and going under, new technologies that simply didn't work, et cetera. And we lost an entire generation in terms of our progress in addressing climate change and all of its many meaningful impacts on the people and the biosphere of this planet. I don't think we can afford to lose another one. So my focus has always been on not necessarily how many megawatts are in the pipeline, how many megawatts are we planning, even necessarily nor is it necessarily a focus on how many megawatts are being built, because that's all flash in the pan. For me, these technologies and these systems and these projects need to be safe, they need to be reliable, and they need to support and build the public trust that is so essential to our long-term success. So for me, I would say I measure success by how many megawatt hours we're actually generating and by the longevity of the systems that we are actually building. Are we building long-term infrastructure or are we messing around? Because I'm not here to mess around.
I think that goes on headline for my marketing team's caption. I am not here to mess around. They would be happy to see that. So, but Wim, jokes apart, that's a great line, right? And that brings me back to let's say, leadership and some thoughts around that. So when you think about building Camelot further, making it bigger, what kind of culture or mindset do you want to leave behind, right? What would be that be? And I think first is that, yeah, we should not be messing around. But after that, what's the kind of culture or mindset would you like to leave behind?
Work is pretty sacred, it's more than a thing that we do for 8 hours a day. It should mean something, right? So I think what I would like to instill is first of all, I would draw probably a fine point of distinction, but an important one. Camelot's mission is to build a just and sustainable society powered by clean energy. That's the work. But the purpose, I would say, is to restore the sanctity of work and the social contract between a business and its people. I think that that is fundamentally broken across our society. The US is leading the way, but it's by no means unique in that regard. I believe that employers used to take care of their people until they learned that they didn't have to, and then they took advantage of that. So in many ways, not counting things like worker safety and health and safety
That's a
standards,
given.
I want to take some of the notion back to that and say, no, this is going to be Camelot is going to be a place of empowered people that are working on a mission. And at the end of their day, they feel like they have left the world a little bit better than when they got up that morning. And if they don't feel that way, then I'm not fully doing my job. So I think that's what I would like to leave behind is I would like to leave behind, a generation of workers who understand what work can be, as opposed to maybe this sort of capitalist hellscape we're vectoring towards in other parts of the industry, in other parts of the economy. So that would be my hope. Yeah, I hope we build some solar projects along the way, but if I can leave behind folks that understand better what business can be in its best form, I think that would be a win.
I think, Sean, what you spoke about the mission and purpose, I think that truly is inspiring. And if I can take uh, a leap from there with the mission and the purpose, let's talk about the impact. Let's say fast forward 2030, 2031, 5, 6 years from now, what kind of impact do you want Camelot to have had on the clean energy ecosystem, right? With this mission and purpose in your head, what impact do you see?
Yeah, I think the impact I would like to have is I would like to empower more people to use and benefit from clean energy. So that for us, I think will mean we touch on a variety of projects. We help a lot of different people advance their clean energy goals. And also that we leave the industry a little bit smarter in 5 years than we find it today. And I'm not saying we have all the answers or we know better than everyone else. But, when I run into clients who don't understand why they should develop projects in a slower and more thoughtful way, or I run into folks that don't understand how batteries work, I have a little bit of a soul of a teacher in me, I think, to some extent. And so if in 5 years our clients are more informed about benefits and risks of clean energy technologies, and they are able to make those investment decisions with a clearer mind and a clearer conscience, that will be a big win, I think, for us, because we really don't have time for bad projects or for folks that don't understand how these things need to be built and developed. So that would be a big impact. I want us to help bring clarity and understanding to as many folks as we can, answer tough questions, ask impertinent ones, and see what we can all do together.
Absolutely, Sean. And I think that's a great point that you made. And again, you put it in really simple, effective words. Just leave people more informed. And I think that has many dimensions to it. But it's just a very, very, very simple sounding mission or impact, but yet so powerful, right? If we could just leave people more informed, I think that definitely will make a huge impact. Let's say if I were to put you in place of where you had to advise somebody, right? So let's say if somebody is entering this space right now who's not informed, right? He knows that, all right, this is an industry that's going through a fantastic time, and it would be great to make a career here. So let's say if somebody's just entering the renewable space, what would be that one piece of advice that you would give, or think of this as what would be your advice to your own 20-year self? What do you wish that you had known when you started? So answer this question in any dimension, but essentially, let's say that there's a kid out there, who's entering the industry now, or there is somebody who wants to start up in the industry. What would be your advice to them?
So I'll firstly say that I hope that everyone watching your show who is an old geezer like me is mentoring the next generation, because it's so important. And the new generation has so much energy, so many ideas. They understand what they're fighting for. Like it's really inspiring for me to spend time with the interns that we bring in, or the clean energy fellows we bring in here at Camelot. I really enjoy participating in mentoring and helping folks find their path. It's a wonderful thing, but we need more of it. So firstly, I hope everybody is trying to mentor the next generation to some extent. But in terms of your question, I would say find your own path. One of the things that was really impactful for me, I went to school at RPI. It was a wonderful school, great engineering school reputation, et cetera. When I got there, there was no renewable energy program, but I entered the applied physics program, and my advisor was a gentleman named Dr. Persans. And I think he set me on the path in many ways, because when I said I wanted to do this, he didn't say we can't do that. He said, okay, let's figure it out. And so I constructed my own undergraduate program. And I mean, obviously they have more courses now than they did back then. But I stitched together a few courses and a lot of independent studies with some of the great professors there, like Dr. Borton, and came out of it with a ton of applicable expertise and experience. But if I had just picked a major and stuck with it, I wouldn't be here today. So think about where you want to get to, and do things that align with that vision, because you don't go from 0 to 60 without passing all of the speeds in between. If you're going to, for example, again, thinking back to kind of college and early career days, don't just take any old job because you need to make a car payment. Look for something that you can at least tie in to your long-term goal and say, okay, what can I take from this? And if you end up working I worked at a pizza place. So what did I take from there? I still use some of the management principles and stuff that I learned, and customer service principles that I learned. Everything you do can teach you something if you let.
Those are some great points there, Sean. And I think for our listeners, I think a great takeaway from here, find your own path. I think that was again very simply but beautifully put by you, Sean. Listening to the university experience, the pizza place experience, I'm tempted to get a couple of more questions in here. I'm just being a little bit greedy, but I think that's a good thing as an entrepreneur, right? So tell me a lesson that you learned the hard way that still shapes how you run Camelot today. Is there an experience that you could share with all of us that you learned the hard way, but still shapes how you run Camelot today?
Yeah, I would say so. So I think one of the things that I've, sometimes once isn't enough. You get a chance to learn hard things twice if you don't pay attention enough the first time. And I'm nothing if not a bit stubborn and dense. I'd say, one of the things is to don't always go for the easy thing, right? So in business, that might mean, for example, having a singular customer that you put all of your efforts into, or that kind of funds most of your work. And I've had this happen twice in my career. And both times, it led to some painful growth opportunities. And that being said, it is impactful and instructive to make those kinds of mistakes. So I don't regret it, but it definitely is something I think about a lot. So I'll focus, for example, in our business, I'll focus as much on the diversity of the work we do as the bottom line dollar figure in many cases. I'll pursue a wider range of things instead of going deeper and deeper with one or two key customers, for example, because I want to, it's funny. For decades, I've been advising my clients to build more resilient energy infrastructure. Well, maybe I need to take a little of my own medicine. So that's been really a really potent and impactful thing to consider is really having that resilience and long term benefit. What's good for you this year may not be good for you next year.
Absolutely. My last question, I promise, and then we'll conclude. But I'm tempted to ask a question, so I'm not holding back. Especially because when you said something around being stubborn, etc. So I have a question.
Afraid I am. My
What
wife would
was
agree.
All right? So what's the one belief that you had early in your career that you were stubborn and believed in, but now have completely changed your mind about? Is there anything, right? So what's the one belief you had early in your career that you have completely changed your mind?
Well, so I have to fess up to a few things here. When I started in this business, was pretty convinced that I was convinced that the future was in solar concentrators, because there was no way we were going to basically use computer chips and circuit boards and build a meaningful energy infrastructure based on this flat plate PV stuff that was so expensive. Oops. So a lot of my early work in school and such was around, these large solar Fresnel concentrating dishes and things of that sort. You'll notice that those are not really dotting the landscape these days. So I was right about solar energy, but I was very wrong about how it was going to be harnessed and used. The universe sometimes gives you a tweak on the nose when you might need it. So a few years ago, I actually had a client reach out and ask me for some help because they were tearing down one of the old solar thermal plants, and guess what? Repowering it with solar PV. And I sort of said, well, this is really putting a nail in the coffin, isn't it? So yeah, no,
That's
I blew that one for sure. But given all the progress we've made, I'll take the trade.
from absolutely pleasure. Thank you. Thank you, Sean. Thank you for taking the time to share your experience and perspective with all of us today. I think your journey across renewables and storage and the clarity with which you have broken down the challenges, the simplicity with which you broke down the conversation today You talked about opportunities in this space. I think it's genuinely valuable for everyone listening. It could be the 20-year-old kid who wants to be in the industry. It could be, somebody like us who's trying to make a difference. So I really appreciate the depth of today's conversation, the honesty of today's conversation, and the practicality that you have brought into the conversation. Thank you, Sean. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mohit. I really appreciate the being on here today.
All right. And to our users, to our listeners, thank you for listening into Barrels to Batteries, brought to you by Enerdatics. If you had if you have enjoyed this episode, please follow the show on Spotify, Apple, wherever you listen to podcasts. Share it with a colleague who cares about the future of energy. This is Mohit Kaul signing off. See you next time. Thank you so much.